So how did you end up getting hired by the Kansas City Chiefs back in the late 70s?
I had been scouting for the Montreal Alouettes of the CFL, and the head coach and general manager there was Marv Levy. And when he took the Kansas City job, he brought me over there as an advanced scout.
What was it like joining the Chiefs in the late 70s? Because they had some success in the early 70s with those great linebackers, but again, those guys were all retiring towards the late 70s.
Yeah, it was a rebuild situation, and we actually got pretty good. I think we got to 9-7 in our fourth year. We had a terrific young back named Joe Delaney, who unfortunately drowned in a tragic accident trying to save a child at a picnic just prior to training camp. And
I remember reading about that. I mean, Joe was, like you said, at a picnic. He didn't know how to swim. All of a sudden, he heard the kids were in trouble.
Right.
He didn't think twice. He just jumped in and tried to save the kids. I think he saved one of them. What was that like for the team that year?
It was devastating. And then on top of that, we had the players' strike, which I think ate up 8 or 9 games. And because of the way upper management, not Mr. Hunt, but people working directly for him, approached the players, we were, when they came back off the strike, we were badly fractured. And even though we beat the Jets, who actually went to the conference championship game that year, in the last game of the season, it was too little too late, and we were let go.
Did you realize the true genius of Marv Levy back then with the Chiefs?
Yeah, absolutely. I realized it in Montreal. No question about it.
What made him so great?
Well, he's along with Tony Dungy, the best teachers I've ever been around in this building, in this business. He's a spellbinding orator. He's got a way of boiling things down to the essence so that everybody can understand them. And he's got a firm grasp of what it takes to win and how to teach players how to do that. So, yeah, I mean, that was pretty evident in Montreal, and it was even more evident in Kansas City.
So how did you end up getting hired by the Chicago Blitz?
Well, when we left Kansas City, I went to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the CFL and was the player personnel director there. And then Marv got hired with the Chicago Blitz and called me and said, come on back, and I did. I was the player personnel director and then eventually acting general manager there.
So how did you decide to go to the Blitz?
Well, Marv Levy had become the head coach there, and the opportunity I thought was a bit better in the USFL than the CFL, although I had enjoyed my time in the CFL and had some overtures from folks that were, thinking about me as a possible general manager. I just felt like the opportunity to go back to Chicago and be in a growing league like that was a better one. And obviously with Marv, it was there was a comfort level there that was off the charts.
That'd be tough, though, going to the Blitz, because George Allen had been there the year before, and it seemed like they took that whole team and they shipped them out to Arizona, and you were starting almost from scratch.
Well, we were. That's correct. We did start from scratch. The only thing we had was the name and the rights, the geographical rights to certain players from Notre Dame and other local schools that were applicable that year, not the previous year. So, that was the situation. But in professional football, really in professional sports, you can't pick your battles. You got to go where the opportunities are, and it was an opportunity, so we tried to make the best of it.
Remember the Blitz players laughing? They said they would rush to the bank to see who could cash their check first because they were afraid of their checks bouncing towards the end.
Well, actually, that took place almost right at the beginning. We were in training camp in Arizona, and Steve Earhart, who's now the executive director of the Liberty Bowl, who was then deputy commissioner of the USFL, came out to see Marv and I to inform us that the doctor who had been our owner had simply pulled out and wasn't going to put any more money in, and it turned the franchise back to the league. So we were in essence working for the league office, and Steve indicated that Marv and I should carry on in the executive capacities and keep going, and that they'd get back to us with a budget relatively soon. And the budget obviously was bare bones. And then subsequently, it got worse. So, we ended up at the end of the season just existing on fumes, really. And we're very fortunate in the sense that they were able to sell the team soon after the season ended to Eddie Einhorn and Jerry Reinsdorf and a man named Gene Fanning, a wonderful man from Chicago named Gene Fanning, who bought the team. But interestingly enough, despite having no players who were highly paid and having virtually no budget and basically having to trade things like jerseys and memorabilia for towels to stage the last game of the season, we ended up, I believe, winning 5 of our last 7. So it just goes to show you what kind of a coach Marv was. He kept the guys going and focused in that situation. It was amazing.
So how did you end up going to the Bills?
Well, Don Lawrence, who was the defensive coordinator of the Bills, had been one of our assistant coaches in Kansas City, and Don and I were close and good friends. And so that year, which would have been '84, I guess, the Bills had just added for the first time a pro personnel director. They had not had one prior to that. And amazingly, when you think about it, the USFL was a going concern. There were players, coming and going on a constant basis, but the Bills didn't have anybody in place to take advantage of that. And they hired that gentleman in January, and then in the spring he sustained or summer actually, sustained a debilitating spinal injury, which didn't allow him to work. And so the position was there, and Mr. Wilson, the owner of the Bills, had grudgingly funded it, but this gentleman wasn't working. He was on disability. So they decided to try and fill the position, and Don Lawrence went to Kay Stevenson, who was the head coach, and said, "Listen, I got just the guy for you. He's now the acting GM of the Chicago Blitz, and he's been in Canada and was with us in Kansas City, etc." And so Kay asked me to come in for an interview, and I did, and we hit it off immediately. And he called me back and said, "I can offer you the job, but it's going to be at a very reduced salary because reduced even from what I was making in Chicago, because we don't really have the funding for it." And so I talked about it with my wife and said, "Listen, it's a chance to go back to the National Football League. You can't pass it up no matter what the circumstances are. We'll figure out a way to handle the finances." So we did, and fortunately it worked out okay.
And your first, signing was Bruce Smith?
Yeah, first major signing.
Terry Bledsoe, who was our general manager, had suffered a very debilitating heart attack and was out of work for the better part of about 6 months. And so Kay went to, and a gentleman named Pat McGroder, who was a senior executive then in his early 80s, but who had been in, with the Bills and with Mr. Wilson from the inception, went to Mr. Wilson and said, listen, we have a guy here who can do this. He's signed guys in the USFL. He understands what the USFL challenge is all about. He can negotiate contracts. And so they had me fly over to Detroit, which is where Mr. Wilson was located, and meet with him. And he gave me my marching orders and said, yeah, go ahead. Let's see if we can't get him signed. So in conjunction with Mr. Wilson's CFO, Dave Olson, who's as fine a man as you'll ever have the opportunity to meet, we negotiated with Bruce's representative, and we were negotiating against the Baltimore Stars, who had his rights in the USFL. And the USFL at that point was still a going concern. Donald Trump had not taken it under at that point. And so the Stars, of course, were very close, located very close to where Bruce had grown up, which was in the Tidewater area of Virginia. And so it was a tough negotiation and a long one. And we had to beat both the Stars' financial offer and convince Bruce that to come to Buffalo, which was coming off a 2-14 season and had just a downtrodden reputation both in professional sports and in society in general because of the weather and all of the economic turndown that had taken place there. We had to convince Bruce to come and convince him that he was going to be the first step in a road to the ultimate success.
So you got a second chance with Jim Kelly. I mean, like you said, it was tough to convince Bruce to come because of what was going on in Buffalo, but then Jim Kelly had already turned down Buffalo a couple of years before. So did you feel the added pressure that you couldn't lose him again?
No, I didn't really feel any pressure. You come to work and you do your job. As I said when I was appointed GM, which was soon after the Bruce, actually it was the following January after we signed Bruce. I was well prepared for the job. I was absolutely unknown outside of a small segment of the pro football industry, but I'd been well prepared. I'd been an advanced scout in Kansas City. I'd signed players there. I had done some minor league coaching. I'd done some coaching in Canada. I'd signed players in Canada, helped build 2 championship teams there, and had gone through the experience of the USFL, which, to say the least, was unique. And so there wasn't any pressure. I knew what I had to do, and set about to do it. And had been through situations, the money was a little more obviously in the NFL, and certainly the exposure is greater, but the job is essentially the same. And I've said on numerous occasions when asked by young people, how can I get to be a GM in the NFL? How can I get to be an executive in the NFL? The answer is, as much as experience at lower levels as you can, because that's what helps you. That's what prepares you. So, I didn't feel any inordinate pressure. It was a situation that we had to take advantage of. Jim's rights were owned by us. The USFL, thanks to Mr. Trump, was in a position where they were not going to go forward, and as a result, we were in a situation where we had a great opportunity to get a player who, was going to make a huge difference for us. So, again, Mr. Wilson said, go do it, and that's what we did.
So how did you convince Jim that he should play for you guys in Buffalo? I mean, I know you had his rights and you didn't really have a choice, but again, you still had to convince him.
Well, we went through 3 separate sort of iterations. The first was for me to explain to him what the rights situation was. We held his rights. Those weren't going to be tradable. And we even discussed the possibility, his agents, and he basically said, what if we force a trade? And I said, well, I don't know that you can force a trade other than, going to court, and even that's not probably going to work. But let's assume that you did. I'll answer the question based on the assumption that you do. You can't force us to trade him just anywhere. And what we'll do is trade him to the last place he wants to go, which is probably Green Bay. At that time, Green Bay, Ron Wolf had not made Green Bay competitive. So they were maybe, football-wise, a step above only the Bills. And I said, you're not going to the Raiders under any circumstances. It was the Raiders who had contacted them and the Raiders with whom they had negotiated. But I said, you will not go to the Raiders under any circumstances. And this isn't the USFL. Mr. Davis doesn't have the right by fiat to decide what players he's going to sign and not sign. So, we have his rights, and you're not going to the Raiders. So that was step 2. And then step 3 was me as a football person sitting down with Jim and saying, look, here's who we have on this team. We built it with you in mind. This is how we're going to do it going forward. This is not a situation where we want to sign you because we want to sell tickets or we want to get the newspaper off our back or anything of that nature. It's because we want you to be a quarterback who takes us to the Super Bowl. And that's our vision, that's our drive, that's our dynamic. And we had a long discussion about what things were like there, what commitment Mr. Wilson was willing to make. He'd already made a significant commitment by signing Bruce and Andre Reed and Frank Reich and others. But I said, he's prepared to make an incredible commitment to you. And then we're going to go ahead and continue to build it. So, if you want to be with a winner, if you want to be with a place that really cares about football, this is the place to be. It takes a leap of faith, I realize. But, if you feel that way, we can do it. And I think we connected. I mean, there's no question we connected. He took that leap of faith. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
So how long did it take you to decide that you wanted Marv Levy to be your head coach?
10 seconds. When Mr. Wilson told me that we were going to make a change in the coaching situation, I simply, however long it took me to get the words out of my mouth, which is approximately 10 seconds, I said, there's only one man for this job, but as far as I'm concerned, it's Marv Levy.
What made Marv such a good coach?
I'm sorry?
What made Marv such a good coach in Kansas City, where you saw him with the Blitz and then with the Bills?
Well, first of all, he's the greatest communicator I've ever been around. And I keep in mind that's high praise because I've been with Tony Dungy as well. And Cal Murphy in Canada, Hall of Famers as well as Marv is. So he's incredible in that regard. Secondly, he's a tremendous organizer. Third, he's the greatest teacher I've ever been around. He's able to boil things down to their essence and get them across to the players in a way that both instructs and inspires. And then finally, he has a vision that is unique in terms of how to prepare a football team, how to treat professionals, how to create a culture of inclusiveness and caring and honesty, because that's the kind of person he is. And in terms of understanding what it took to win, and the ability to do that immediately, I had no question that he was the right man. We had turned the corner in Kansas City, only to strike and in '82 got in the way of that, and the unfortunate death of Joe Delaney, of course, but largely the strike. We would have turned the corner there. Interestingly, Mr. Hunt told Mr. Wilson, who called for a reference, he said to Mr. Wilson, the greatest mistake I've made in my entire football career is letting Marv Levy go. And I think that cinched it for Mr. Wilson in terms of making the hire. But he's everything you want in a football coach. He's the measuring stick I used from that day to this. Everything you want in a coach: vision, strategy, organization, communication, inspiration. He's got it all.
You put some great players on that Buffalo team with Kelly, Thurman Thomas. You had Andre Reed. You brought James Lofton in on defense, like you said, Bruce Smith. You had Steve Tasker. You had Darryl Talley, Cornelius Bennett. I mean, how hard was it finding that talent, or is it just that you got lucky, or you had a good personnel department around you?
No, we didn't get lucky. Darryl Royal once said, "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity," and that's what occurred there. But we knew and we've done this wherever I've been. We knew exactly the kind of player that we wanted. So that made it relatively easy to scout. We didn't concern ourselves with outside forces, noise, consensus, other people's opinions. And we simply took the players that we felt were best for our team, and when we used every avenue we could to try and unearth those players: college draft, collegiate free agency, USFL, waivers, as is the case with Steve Tasker, trades, Leonard Smith, for example, Kenneth Davis, Cornelius Bennett. They all came through trades. So we used every possible alternative, or every possible avenue, I should say, to find players, but we were looking for the same kinds of players in every particular area.
I remember talking to Packers from the late 50s like Hornick and Jim Taylor and Bart Starr, and they said that Green Bay was the football Siberia then, but Lombardi came in and the whole mentality changed. Was that how it was in Buffalo too? Kind of like players didn't want to play there, but when you came and you brought Marv Levy, the whole mentality changed?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't as much me as it was Marv. I will say this. I've not spent a lot of time in Green Bay, but what time I've spent there, I certainly know that it is it's a special place. Buffalo is too. When I first took the job in Buffalo, the first person I saw after I came back from the press conference was the ticket manager, who said, "Well, congratulations, but we now have 12,000 season tickets in an 80,000 seat stadium." And so I was a bit floored by that number, but I wasn't, you could understand it given how bad the team had been. And, the loss of Jim Kelly, the loss of Joe Cribbs, it was just kind of a snowball rolling downhill in the wrong direction. And so I, along with our general manager, Bill Munson, went out and tried to meet with as many groups as we could, A, to try to take their temperature. Why were you not supporting the Bills? And B, what can we do to make it better? And I would always introduce myself the way I did at the press conference. I'm Bill Who. I'm a guy whose name nobody knows. But here's my background. And strangely, people almost on faith accepted, well, you're a football guy. We trust you. You'll get it done. Now, here's what you need to do. You need to make tickets more available to us. We need to have better customer service. And by all means, we need to have better security at the stadium. That's in over 200 appearances. That was an absolute consensus. So because I guess my football background was so extensive and my notoriety was so limited, people just assumed, hey, this guy's a blue-collar guy, who knows football. He'll get the right players. And so for that, I'm really grateful. The fans of Buffalo took a chance on me, if you will. And so the support came pretty quickly. And then once Marv came, the players just changed. Well, first of all, when Jim came, I've often said there was a black cloud over the franchise. The day he signed, the day he arrived, that black cloud lifted, and there was nothing but blue sky from there on in. The fact that the prodigal son had come home, who had finally chosen Buffalo after rejecting it, and was here, to lead us to the promised land. I realize I'm mixing my biblical metaphors here, but I mean that was the way it was. That's the way it was. It was not only portrayed but lived. I told Jim on the flight to Buffalo after we signed the contract and we're coming into the press conference. I said, you've never experienced anything like this in your life. You are going to see a reception the likes of which you've never experienced. And as we exited the plane, there had to be, 15 or 20 television crews there, people from all over Western New York, Canada, etc. And then we took an expressway into the city. We had to hold a press conference at a downtown hotel because the Bills facility could not accommodate it. It was so large. And we had to drive down on a freeway that had any number of overpasses over it. About every quarter of a mile there was an overpass. And from the overpass, people were standing there with signs, "Welcome back, Jim. Thank God, Jim, you're here. Let's go win a Super Bowl," things of that nature. People 4 and 5 deep on the overpass, just waving at the motorcade. He was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe it. And then when we got to the hotel, it was as though it was a presidential press conference. There was a dais. There had to be at least 250 media people there. They simply preempted the network evening news in Buffalo and in nearby Canadian cities and in Rochester to carry the press conference live. So it was a big day, and people there were simply rejoicing because the symbol of all that had gone wrong, this great quarterback that we drafted who had chosen not to come, now was there, and we were on the right road. So that was the catalytic moment where once again everybody said, "Hey, the Buffalo Bills are back."
That comeback game where Frank Reich brought you guys back against the Oilers, did you think that game was over at halftime and that let's get ready for next year?
Yeah, pretty much. I should share this with you, though.
Yes.
Jim's arrival was part one of the puzzle, and part two really was Marv. When Marv came in, the morale was really, really down. Jim was playing, but he didn't have a good relationship with his position coach or really with the head coach. The offensive line guys were really out of sorts. The defense was not performing well, and everybody was sort of really more down in the dumps than even when we were 2-14, because the players' expectations were higher, and they were beaten down by, constant carping and criticism, and so Marv came in and called the team together, and he spoke for about, 7 minutes, 8 minutes. And among the things he said was, what it takes to win is simple, but it isn't easy. We're going to do the following things. We're going to play smart football. We're not going to be dumb, and we're not going to be dirty. We're not going to get penalties. We're not going to beat ourselves. We're going to pay attention to detail. The devil is in the detail. We're going to expect adversity, but we're also going to expect to overcome it. No one is preordained as a loser. No franchise is preordained as a loser. And then finally, we're not going to have a lot of rules. I want you to be on time. I want you to be a professional in everything you do in and outside this building. And I want you to be a good citizen. Those are our rules. And he said, now let's take the first step. Our goal here is very simple. We're going to win the Super Bowl. We take the first step this Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's go get ready to beat the Steelers. The players stood up and applauded. Unbelievable. Never seen it before or since. They simply stood up and applauded. It was though they had said to themselves, okay, we finally now have the guy who can take us where we want to go.
So he won that team over just with his first speech.
For the very first time, he stuck to the podium. He had them in the palm of his hands.
So that team started becoming successful. You had that game against the Oilers like we were talking about, and you're down at halftime. Did you think to yourself, okay, let's get ready for next year? I mean, this game is over. Or did you think we can maybe come back in this game?
Well, no. I frankly, I said, oh, boy, what a way to end. This is awful. Given all we'd accomplished. But then we came out, and I don't know if you remember, Houston scored right away, a field goal right away.
Right.
And this is a very funny story. In those days, I used to sit out on the photo deck in what amounted to a little bit of a lean-to, and so fans sat directly in front of, within arm's distance of me. And all during the first half, these bunch of fans, or 5 or 7 guys in front of us, were just furious, and yelling, you guys stink, this is awful, it's terrible. And they got up at halftime and walked out, and as did many of the people in the stadium. And by the way, the game was not a sellout. People forget that now. We didn't televise it in Western New York because it wasn't a sellout. But anyway, we get scored on right away, and things are looking even worse. And then, bingo, Frank threw a touchdown pass to Don Beebe. And then we got another quick touchdown off return turnover, and we're still, I think 4 scores down at that point. But it was obvious we were going to onside kick. Marv had gotten the onside kick group together on the sideline. You could see that. And so I turned to Bob Ferguson, our assistant general manager, and I said, you know what? If we get this onside kick, we're going to win the game. And he said to me, you've lost your mind. You've finally gone over the edge. We just kind of laughed, and boom, we get the onside kick. And on the very next play, I think Frank threw a touchdown pass to Andre Reed, and now the route is on. Houston is in a position where they now saying to themselves, uh-oh, this, we've awakened this giant, and here they come. And naturally the fans went bonkers. And our security director, who was seated next to me, said to me, people were trying to get back in the stadium, and we closed the gates at halftime after people left for obvious reasons. You don't want people, coming in without a ticket halfway through the game. And he said, what should we do? They're trying to climb the fence. I said, open the gates. What the heck? And so people came flooding back in from the parking lots and wherever have you. And these same guys, we'd scored again and then quickly scored again to tie the game. And here come these same guys who were who were just really letting us have it before the half. They come running up and they're high-fiving us and going, wow, what a great team. This is unbelievable. So it shows you the fortunes of war. But, you know, I don't think at halftime any of us thought we had a chance. Only the players and Marv.
People talk about how hard it is to win a Super Bowl, but again, you guys went back 4 consecutive years to that Super Bowl. I don't think that'll ever be done again. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's going to be awfully difficult. I mean, I think it's like Joe DiMaggio's 56-game streak. There may be people who come close, but it's going to be awfully difficult, principally because the rules have changed dramatically. With the advent of the salary cap, you have a situation where teams turn over so much, and particularly teams that are fortunate enough to make the Super Bowl, they turn over so much that it's hard to have the kind of continuity that you need to do it as many times as we did. And secondly, I think the grind of the season and the grind of going back time and time again is really difficult. It wears on a team after a while.
How frustrating was it, though, that you weren't able to get over the top and win that Super Bowl for Buffalo?
Well, I regret it for the fans. You know, to me, that was the most important thing. The fans who had supported us so loyally throughout that whole run, you know, who had made this, you know, made the Bills story number one 24/7, 365 days a year. You know, for us not to get that for them was pretty frustrating. Now, you know, when you're in the business, you realize that the Super Bowl is just one game. It's not a 7-game series, and a game can turn on luck. It can turn on a break. It can turn on anything that, you know, you in many respects can't control. For example, in Super Bowl 25, if we have one more timeout, excuse me, Thurman Thomas probably runs another 15 yards, and we take the timeout and kick the field goal, and the result, I'm sure, would have been different, but we didn't have it. So, you know, that's the way it goes. But from the standpoint of the fans, I really, you know, I still feel very sorry that we didn't get it for them. But interestingly enough, what makes Buffalo so special is when we went to our first Super Bowl in Indianapolis, I heard from literally, you know, dozens of fans, more than dozens, upwards of about 75 or so fans who wrote and called and sent messages saying, we're rooting for you. This is our Super Bowl.
You go to Carolina and you get that team to the championship game in the second year with a bunch of veterans. How satisfying was that to take an expansion team to a championship in the second year?
Well, it was a unique situation. Again, the rules have been changed afterwards. We were able to take advantage of the rules because any veteran contracts that you had inherited through the expansion draft were not it was simply counted dollar for dollar on the salary cap. So we went, with few exceptions, maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, we took the lowest contracts we could and left ourselves as much salary cap room as we possibly could. So we were able, over the first 2 years of the franchise existence, to sign any number of free agents who really made a difference for us. So by the time we lined up even that first year and finished with a 7-9 record, which was the best of any expansion team in any sport, we were a veteran defense. We had guys on defense who really could play, and we had a coach, Tom Capers, who was just a phenomenal defensive mind, and we were able to build a defense that was, by the end of the first season, that was as good as any in the league. And then, you know, by adding through the draft Kerry Collins and Timbiaka Batuka and Muhsin Muhammad and a darn good offensive line, we were able to grow that offense the second year, in addition to having another great free agency acquisition in Wesley Walls, and you know, Anthony Johnson we'd gotten in the expansion draft. A couple of our other receivers, Mark Carrier, had come to us in the expansion draft. So we were able to put together a very, very outstanding team real quickly. And had we run up against anybody, perhaps but Mike Holmgren's Green Bay Packers, we might well have gone to the Super Bowl. But we had to go to Green Bay and play against what was a very special Green Bay team, who, you know, with Brett Favre and company, who went on to win the Super Bowl. But you know, we deserved to be there. It wasn't a fluke by any means.
Was the decision hard to go to Indianapolis? Because, again, that organization had been in disarray for years. I know they had a successful year at Harbaugh a couple of years before that, but, again, it didn't seem like that the ownership situation was stable there with Bob Irsay.
No, it wasn't. And had that been the case, I probably never would have even considered it. But Jim Irsay had taken over. I forget whether Mr. Irsay had passed away at that point or not. I think he had. But Jim had taken over, and Jim and I had worked together on the NFL Management Council as we executed and negotiated and executed the collective bargaining agreement from 1989 to 93. And we'd gotten to know each other and respect each other and become friends. And he mentioned to me, you know, if there's ever a time that you know, you feel like you want to leave Carolina, just let me know. And there'd been some changes in the front office and the management in Carolina, and I just felt like, you know, maybe we'd gone as far as we could go there in terms of having to rebuild the team again, because it was getting a little bit old and there wasn't quite the commitment to I think to rebuild that I thought was necessary. And you know, Jim happened to check in with me, how's everything going? And I said, well, you know, if you're interested in making a change, then I might be interested in coming. So he went and called Jerry Richardson, and they worked out a trade for my rights, which when I found out what the price was, I was shocked and chagrined. It was a third-round draft choice. That was unbelievable. But in any event, it worked out, and I had, you know, 14 great years in Indianapolis.
So you couldn't get Marv Levy to join you in Indianapolis?
No, he was still coaching the Bills, and I wasn't going to in any way disrupt that. Mr. Wilson had been too good to me, and Marv had been too good to me for me to, you know, to go in there and do that. That wasn't going to happen. So we hired Jim Mora, and then subsequently Tony Dungy, who led us to another Super Bowl victory.
What was Tony Dungy like when you first met him?
It was an amazing situation. We'd known each other. We served on the competition committee together for maybe 4 or 5 years before the opening occurred in Indianapolis. But Mr. Irsay had posed a question to me. He said, what happens if Tony Dungy's fired by the Buccaneers? And I said, all bets are off. Just call the airport, get the plane ready, and I'll go to Florida and get him done. He's our first and only choice. And so Jim said, okay. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So I flew down to Tampa, and I met with Tony for about 6 hours. Neither of us, even to this day, believed that we felt that it was that long. It went so quickly and so swimmingly, but it was, because he had to leave to fly to Carolina. He promised Mr. Richardson that he would interview there. And but during this little anecdote from the discussion is proof of it. I asked Tony a question about how he would prepare the team and what his practice regimen and organization would be going from training camp to the Super Bowl. And about a third of the way through, he stopped me and he said, "Have I said something funny?" And I said, "No." And he said, and I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you're smiling and nodding your head." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, "I've heard this all before verbatim from Marv Levy. It's as though you're channeling him." And then we got off on a little bit of a sidebar discussion. Had you ever run across Marv? Have you ever been in a situation where, you've been exposed to his teachings? And he said, no, I haven't. He said, I know of him very well. And ironically enough, we tried to sign Tony in Montreal when Marv was there, but he elected to go to the Steelers. He was a quarterback in college and would have been a great Canadian quarterback, but he elected to go play DB with the Steelers. But in any event, he said, no, I've never had any real, up-close exposure to Marv. And I said, well, it's just incredibly amazing that you two are so alike philosophically. So I knew right then and there that this was going to be a match made in heaven because, we saw things so just so alike in terms of how you should build and run a program.
You struck gold with Jim Kelly in Buffalo, and you struck gold with Peyton Manning in Indy. How did you decide to draft Peyton and not Ryan Leaf? Was there any discussion among you and your staff that maybe we should take Ryan Leaf instead, or was it Peyton all the way?
No, we when I got to Indianapolis, met with the scouting staff, and that was early January, and they were split right down the middle, 50-50. 50% Peyton, 50% Ryan. So I said, well, okay, let's go back to ground zero. We had our a film department put together every pass that both guys had thrown as collegians. We had any number of people go through, scouts, coaches, even Bill Walsh. I asked to take a look at it and give us an opinion. And of course I went through it on numerous occasions. And when we finally reached right around March 1st, I would say, clearly among Coach Mora, Tom Moore, our offensive coordinator, Bruce Arians, our quarterback coach, and myself, there was a clear consensus that Peyton was the guy for any number of reasons, many of which were football related. The conventional wisdom was that Peyton had a weak arm, that he wasn't very athletic, that he was quote, a product of the system. To this day, I don't know what that means, but nor does David Cutcliffe for that matter. But the opposite was true in every respect. And when you measured it, both empirically and physically in the workouts, individual workouts, Peyton was by far the better choice. And then from a psychological and a maturity standpoint, it wasn't even close. So by the time we reached April 1st, we had made the decision. It was Peyton hands down.
The offense you had in Indy and also in Buffalo, the quarterback basically ran the offense. You went with the no huddle in Buffalo and seemed like a similar situation in Indy. Is it because your quarterbacks were that smart, or was it just that offense is tough to defend?
Really a combination of both. It takes a special quarterback to operate it, and it is very difficult to defend. It dictates to the defense, and but it takes a while to learn, and different quarterbacks have different personalities. Jim, for example, loved to know the up-tempo part of it. He wanted to go. That fit his personality perfectly. Fast break football, that was him to a T. he and Frank and Ted Marchibroda had a signal system worked out where they would simply, throw a signal at one another and the play would come in and away you go. Peyton, when he first started with Tom in the no huddle and Bruce, wanted to go much more slowly because he wanted to make sure that every blitz that could possibly come at us was picked up. And that was a good thing because things had changed when we went to Carolina and when Pittsburgh came to the fore with the zone blitz. We were the two biggest proponents of it at the time. You better make sure you know who's picked up, because if you don't, you're liable to get the quarterback killed. So we went at a much slower tempo in the early going in Indianapolis. When Peyton became comfortable and when our offensive line became comfortable with the blitz pickups, then we were able to go at a much higher tempo, which he learned as obviously you saw in Denver as well, which he learned to master, and he could control the tempo of the game like an orchestra leader. If he wanted to go fast, he could go fast. If he wanted to go slowly, he could go slowly. And, we recognized, and he recognized when we became a mature team 3 or 4 years in, that we could, in many ways, control what the Patriots, among others, did to us by simply using tempo. We could wear them out. And that was true virtually of every 3-4 team we played. Those big guys can't go at that tempo. They're not conditioned to do it. So tempo became a very important thing for us, although it wasn't at the beginning.
How satisfying was it to win that Super Bowl against the Bears, to finally get your first Super Bowl?
Well, I can't say it was, the be-all and end-all. It's great to win it. I've always believed that if you get there, it's a marvelous thing, and that in the media absolutely downplays what a terrific season the Super Bowl losers had. Oftentimes they treat that team as though we're 2-14 when in fact they've had a great season. So, it's great to win, obviously, but my life wasn't going to end if we didn't win it, because it's only one game, as I said, and there's a lot that you can't control. For example, that particular game was the only foul weather game there's been in the history of the Super Bowl. Poured rain from start to finish in Miami, of all places, and not missed either. It was a pouring hard rain. So, we were fortunate enough to come out on top. But that's one game, and there's a lot you can't control. Having said that, there's no loss like the Super Bowl. It stays with you it stays with you forever, really. But and you can't get it out of your system until you kick it off the next year. And winning is obviously the opposite, and you got to be careful not to let it hang on too long. Fortunately, in Indianapolis, we didn't. We came back and had a great season the following year. But it's wonderful to win, no question about it. For me, going to the White House was the most special part of it. I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. But as I said, I wasn't going to go out and run in front of traffic if we'd lost the game either.
How did you feel when you found out you got into the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
I was dumbfounded. I'd written a book, and I was in Buffalo, of all places, promoting the book, on the typical author's book tour. And I just got back to my room and was about ready to go out for a workout. It was around 3 p.m. Before the evening appointments. And I got a call. And it was David Baker, the president of the Hall of Fame. And when the call came in on my cell phone, I looked at the number. It was a California number, and I was about to just let it ring and take a message because I don't know anybody in California that would necessarily call me other than a media call. So, and I wasn't getting many of those anymore. But I did answer it, and David came on the line, and he said, "It's my honor to tell you that you've been nominated as one of the two candidates for the senior category." He explained that I still had to be voted in, but that the nomination would stand alone, and it would be an up or down vote, not in competition with any players or anybody else. And I honestly, I didn't have a response. I was completely dumbfounded. In fact, I think I said, "Holy shit," to be very honest, because he remembered. He said to me, "There are others in the room here. This is an open line." So I apologized, and I'm never in a million years did I ever think that it would come about. Never.
And then when you finally got in and got to give the speech, was it just like surreal?
Yeah, very much so. I'd been there for induction of many players that I've been fortunate enough to be with, and I presented Marv when he was inducted. So, I knew exactly what was going to take place. But you're right, it was extremely surreal. It's almost as though it's happening to someone else.
And now your coach is going, and your second coach, and Tony Dungy.
Yep, indeed. I'm looking forward to it. And Marvin Harrison.
And Marvin, you're a wide receiver. I mean, when you go back there, do you think to yourself, I can't believe I'm part of this group?
Absolutely. I got in this business hoping to be a small college head coach. That was the extent of my dreams, if you will. Obviously, I grew up rooting for Frank Gifford and Charlie Connolly and Andy Robustelli and the New York Giants, and so they were always my heroes. But I never thought that I'd make it to the league. And it's always an ambition you have, but it's something that's way off in the distance. And never thought that I'd get to become friends with Frank Gifford and talk football with him, or get to know Don Shula or Paul Brown or any of these giants that I had admired from afar. So, many times I just thank the Lord that I had the opportunities I've had, and it's an amazing situation to be able to be part of such a thing. I never envisioned it, that's for sure.